Chapter 1. Whispers of War. Autumn 1863. Near Culpeper, Virginia. The air, sharp with the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, carried the distant rhythmic thwack of an axe biting into timber. George H. Thiel, a young man whose chin looked too smooth for the convincing beard he'd tried to cultivate, flicked the reins of the sway-backed mare. "Easy now, Bess," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the mournful rattle of the cart behind her. Its meager contents, a collection of tin pots that gleamed dully, threadbare blankets, and several plugs of overpriced tobacco, shifted and clanked with each rut in the muddy track. To any casual observer, he was just another itinerant peddler. Amos Shackelford, the sign crudely painted on his cart might have read, if he'd had one. Another piece of human flotsam, washed up by the relentless tides of war, trying to scratch a living from the ravaged Virginia countryside. That, of course, was precisely the illusion George cultivated. His eyes, a pale, watchful blue, scanned not the goods he ostensibly hawked, but the subtle signs that painted a truer picture of the landscape. Too many tracks here, he thought, his gaze lingering on the churned-up earth, veering off towards the dense woods to the east, and all heading the same way. He'd passed a few women earlier working barren fields, their faces anxious and tight-lipped. They'd barely looked up, their silence more telling than any words. Even the birds, it seemed to George, had learned a more cautious silence in these troubled times. He'd been Amos Shackelford. For the better part of 3 weeks now, his native Ohio accent, carefully blunted into a passable, if unremarkable, Virginian drawl. Amos was a man of few words and fewer opinions, a useful trait when navigating territory sympathetic to the secessionists. His real mission, whispered to him in a hushed tent by a major whose face he barely recalled, was to gauge the strength and disposition of General Early's men, rumored to be regrouping somewhere north of the Rapidan River. "Find out what you can, Thiel," the major had said, his breath the smelling of stale coffee and anxiety. Numbers, morale, direction, anything. He'd chosen his route to skirt a small, half-ruined village named Providence Church. It wasn't much more than a crossroads with a burnt-out meeting house and a sullen-looking general store that seemed to trade more in rumors than in actual goods. It was there, he hoped, that loose talk might yield a kernel of truth. As he approached, the thudding of the axe grew louder, more insistent. A Confederate picket, his butternut uniform faded to a dusty yellow and patched in several places, leaned wearily on his rifle near a makeshift barricade of felled logs. He eyed George's cart with a mixture of disinterest and ingrained suspicion. "Halt there, peddler," the soldier called out, his voice rough, tired. "State your name and business." George pulled Bess to a gentle stop. "Afternoon to you, soldier," he said, his voice carefully pitched to sound harmless, perhaps a little slow-witted. "Name's Amos Shackelford, sir. Just trying to make my way, sell a few goods. Got pots, pans, a bit of baccy. Might be of use to folks around here." He gestured vaguely towards his cart with a calloused hand. The soldier grunted, his gaze lingering on the cart. "Baccy, you say? What kind?" "Virginia leaf, mostly. Best I could find, though times are hard for quality, as you know." "Ain't that the truth?" the soldier sighed. Then his eyes sharpened again. "Seen any Yanks about?" "Yanks?" Amos Shackelford looked suitably bewildered. "No, sir. Not a blue coat in sight for miles, praise be. Roads are quiet. Too quiet, if you ask me." George kept his expression placid. "Heard tell some of our brave boys might be camped round here. Thought I might find a customer or two for my wares. Soldiers always need a good tin cup or a bit of smoking tobacco." This was the delicate part, expressing a desire to trade with the soldiers without seeming overly eager or inquisitive. Another soldier, a corporal by the stripes on his sleeve, emerged from the dim interior of the general store, wiping biscuit crumbs from his mouth with the back of his hand. "What's this then, Jed? Got a visitor?" "Just a peddler, Corp," Jed replied, jerking a thumb towards George. "Name is Shackelford. Says he ain't seen no Yanks. Looking to trade?" The corporal, a man with a hard, sun-creased face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, circled the cart slowly. He picked up a tin cup, examined its shoddy make with a disdainful sniff, and tossed it back amongst the other goods with a clatter. "Scrawny pickings, peddler. This all you got?" "Times are hard, Corporal," George said, offering a small, ingratiating smile. "But a man's got to eat. These are good, honest wares." "Where you from, Shackelford?" the corporal asked, his voice flat. "Louisa County, mostly. Born and bred. Just wondering where the Lord and the war take me these days." George offered a touch of piety, however feigned. He'd learned it often softened suspicion. "Louisa, eh?" The corporal scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. "We got some Louisa boys in the 13th up yonder." He jerked his head vaguely towards the east, the direction of the woods George had noted earlier. The Fighting 13th. Might be they'd remember you. What say you to that? A test. George felt a familiar cold prickle at the back of his neck, the sensation that always accompanied the tightrope walk of deception. He couldn't claim to know men he didn't. That was a rookie's mistake. "Might be, sir, might be," he said, looking down as if embarrassed. "It's a big county, Louisa, and I mostly keep to the back roads, trying to avoid, well, trouble, you understand. A man alone with goods, he's got to be careful." He let his gaze drop as if ashamed of his own caution. The corporal grunted again. "Sensible enough, I suppose. Anything to report? Troop movements? Stragglers? Anything out of the ordinary?" "Nothing but quiet roads, sir. Too quiet sometimes." George focused on a loose buckle on Bess's harness, feigning concentration. "Folks are keeping to themselves, mostly. Scared, I reckon. Heard some cannons way off south a few days back, but that's all." "They got reason to be scared," the corporal said, his eyes still narrowed. He seemed to be weighing George, trying to see past the simple peddler persona. "His whole damn country's got reason to be scared." Jed, the first soldier, chimed in. "Hear that, Amos? Even the corporal's spooked." The corporal shot Jed a glare. "Just being realistic, Private. Now, peddler, you got anything worth my time? That tobacco any good? Or is it floor sweepings?" "Prime leaf, Corporal, I assure you," George said, reaching for a plug. "Smooth smoke. Help a man forget his troubles for a spell." It was in these moments that George felt most alive, every nerve ending humming. It wasn't just about remembering the fabricated details of Amos Shackelford's life. It was about being Amos. It was about the slight slump of the shoulders, the dullness in the eyes, the carefully chosen words that revealed nothing of the keen mind working furiously beneath the surface. He learned early in this dangerous game that information was currency, but trust, or the illusion of it, was the key to obtaining it. The corporal took the offered plug, bit off a corner, and chewed thoughtfully. "Not bad," he conceded after a moment. "Not bad at all. What's your price?" They haggled for a few minutes, the corporal feigning disinterest, George playing the part of the eager but reluctant seller. Finally, a deal was struck for a few plugs of tobacco and a tin pot. "Well, move along then, Shackelford," the corporal said finally, waving a dismissive hand. "But stick to the main tracks. Woods ain't safe for your sort. Full of deserters and Lord knows what else. And keep your eyes peeled. If you see anything unusual, you let the next picket post know." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "And you, Jed." George clucked to the mare, the cart groaning as it lurched forward. He didn't look back, didn't allow himself the luxury of a relieved sigh until Providence Church was a good quarter-mile behind him. The corporal's casual mention of the 13th and the direction he'd indicated were small pieces, but pieces nonetheless. Later, in the dim, dusty light of the general store, pretending to haggle over a bit of salt pork with the sullen storekeeper, he listened. "Reckon those boys from the 13th will clear out soon?" George asked the storekeeper, as if making idle conversation. "Must be eating you out of house and home." The storekeeper, a gaunt man with suspicious eyes, slammed a slab of bacon on the counter. "They take what they want, mostly. Requisitions, they call 'em. Ain't seen coin from a soldier in months. And they ain't telling me their traveling plans, peddler." Two old men sat by the cold stove, arguing in low voices. "Early's a fool," one muttered. "Should have pushed on to Washington when he had the chance." "Hush now, Silas," the other cautioned, glancing nervously at George. "Walls have ears, and Early's got more men than you got teeth." George bought a small sack of cornmeal he didn't need, and a twist of the storekeeper's worst tobacco, making a show of counting his few coins. He noted the brands of hardtack crumbs on the counter. Northern or Southern issue? He saw a discarded military button near the woodpile. What regiment? Every detail, no matter how small, was filed away. "You heading north or south, peddler?" the storekeeper asked as George turned to leave. "North, I reckon," George replied. "Heard tell things are a bit better up towards the Rapidan." "Better for who?" the storekeeper grumbled, turning back to his ledgers. That evening, miles away, huddled under a leaky oilcloth shelter as a cold drizzle began to fall, George carefully transcribed his observations into a small, coded ledger. "The 13th Virginia," he wrote. Likely a regiment of it was indeed camped in the woods east of Providence Church. Morale among the pickets seemed low, their equipment worn. The locals were resentful but cowed. He estimated, based on overheard snippets and the general level of activity, at least a brigade, possibly more, using the woods as a staging area. He paused, the stub of his pencil hovering over the page. The thrill of the successful deception was already fading, replaced by a colder, more analytical satisfaction. This war was teaching him many things. The art of becoming invisible in plain sight, the power of a carefully crafted lie, the way fear and hope could make men careless with their words. He was learning to read the subtle currents of human behavior, to sift truth from the chaff of misinformation. George H. Thiel didn't know then that he was laying the foundation not just for his survival as a Union spy, but for a future he couldn't yet imagine. He only knew that in a world turned upside down by conflict, the ability to navigate the shadows, to listen to the whispers, was a skill more valuable than any musket or cannon, and he was becoming a master of it. The rain pattered softly on the oilcloth, a lonely sound in the vast, dark expanse of enemy territory. George closed his ledger, the day's gleaning secure. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the darkness. "New roads, new faces, new deceptions." And he would be ready.